So I've been thinking this week about photo albums. Photo albums. How many of you have photo albums? Is that a thing anymore? My family has several photo albums. No joke, I bet you about 10. 10 photo albums. My wife and the kids aren't here, they're in Canada, so I can now say this about my wife. She's a photoholic. She can't help. Show up new place, wherever she is, and photos, and lo and behold, they find their way into a photo album. My family loves them. My kids every so often like to pull the albums, one or two, off the shelf. They flip through the pages and they ask one another, "Do you remember that? Remember that? I love that bike. That was the best birthday ever." And they go through, and I always love the one where they see a picture of their parents when they were younger, maybe in the mid-20s, and they go, "Is that you? Is that you?" I say, "Yep, keeps getting better with age." Photo albums are a lot of fun. They remind us, of course, of good times. A child's first steps, a road trip out west, the day the training wheels came off, the Christmas when everybody made it home, gathering for Grandma's 90th birthday. And on it goes, photo after photo, album after album. Of course, photo albums don't just chronicle good times, they chronicle challenging times too, don't they? Oh, yeah, that photo. That's the one where I was laid off for about a year. Yeah, things were tight. No smiles in that photo, are there? Oh, that photo. Yeah, that was right after the accident. Could have been worse, but wow, that was something. And then there are those photos, of course, not many. We don't keep many in the album, but a handful that remind us of our most difficult days. That one, yeah, that photo. That's when he received the diagnosis. It was almost a year later, and then he was just gone. But I love that photo. Yeah, that photo. That photo. They look good there, don't they? Ah, shoot, that was right before they split up. We were all so surprised. Photos that remind us of some of the most difficult times in our lives, but they're there. They're all there. Photos of good times, challenging times, even bad times. We keep them all there on the shelf. It's quite amazing, really. Small, two-dimensional artifacts that can spark so many memories, so many stories, so many emotions. Why do we keep them? I suppose they remind us of who we are, where we've come from, where we've been over the years, what's been important to us. And just maybe when we look through the whole album, we'll begin to get a glimpse of maybe what the future holds. Photo albums tell us who we are and where we're going. I've been thinking about photo albums this week because I've been reading Hebrews. And it's really no different here in our reading from Hebrews. Now, we don't know who the author of Hebrews is, but it seems he's a pastor of a congregation who is struggling to the point of giving up. And what does he do? He pulls out God's photo album and reminds the people of who they are, where they've come from, what's important, and where they're going. Here's the background. The author of Hebrews is dealing with a congregation that, frankly, has had it. They're worn out. They've had enough. They're tired of struggling with their faith. It wasn't always like that. In chapter 10, we read that there was a time when the congregation stood its ground in a great contest, even, in the face of suffering. The author goes on, sometimes you were publicly exposed to insult and persecution. At other times, you stood side by side with those who were so treated. You sympathized with those in prison and joyfully accepted the confiscation of your property, because you knew that you yourselves had better and lasting possessions. But no more. In chapter 12, we learn that the people have come to be having feeble arms and weak knees. Do you ever have feeble arms and weak knees? Christian faith can be tough. There are good times, to be sure, but the struggles can be overwhelming. As a denomination, we know all too well, given this summer's events. Feeble arms and weak knees. Our denomination is struggling. Some of you, some of us are worn out, tired, wondering whether we should just show up at all anymore. Any of you know what I'm talking about? But it's not just our denomination. This isn't new. Across the country, we're seeing more indication of struggling churches, whether due to COVID, the culture wars, or any number of factors. Recently, the Barna Group surveyed pastors across the country and found that in October 2021, 38% of Protestant pastors had seriously considered quitting full-time ministry. And that number was nearly a third higher than when Barna asked the same pastors the same questions in January of 2021. It's going quick. But it's not just pastors. According to Gallup in 2020, 47% of Americans said that they belonged to a religious organization, as compared to 50% in 2018 and 79% in 1999. And I know the numbers don't tell the whole story, but one thing is clear. The church in America is struggling, and many of us are just tired. And so it's time. It's time for God's photo album to come off the shelf. So we read in chapter 11, verse 1. Now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. For instance, there's Abel, earlier in our reading, Abel, the son of Adam and Eve, and it says, by faith, Abel offered God a better sacrifice. And then there's Enoch. In Genesis, it says that faith of Enoch allowed him to walk with God. And then by faith, Noah. And by faith, Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Jacob and Moses. And by faith, the people passed through the Red Sea as if on dry ground. But when the Egyptians tried to do so, they were drowned. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell after the people had marched around them for 7 days. And then there's this photo. Rahab. Rahab. Here, in the photo album, yes, Rahab. She was from Jericho, a Canaanite, and a prostitute. An outsider, a prostitute in the photo album, yes. Because what really matters is that by faith, she welcomed the Hebrew spies into Canaan, which allowed them to plan the taking of Jericho. And she humbled herself before the Lord. And because of her faith, God considered her righteous. And she wasn't killed with those who were disobedient. So remarkable is this story of Rahab's faith that her photo belongs next to the likes of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Let's face it, every family has a Rahab, but not every photo album has a photo of Rahab. bet some churches wouldn't put her photo in the album. I bet some denominations wouldn't put her in the album either. It just wouldn't look right. But she made it to God's photo album. This is just the opening pages of this album. The photos go on and on. Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, the prophets. Through faith they conquered kingdoms, shut the mouths of lions, doled out justice, quenched the fires. And when they were weak, God turned it into strength. You see, all of the faithful here in this array, all of the faithful have at least one thing in common. They trusted God even when they did not understand what God was up to. They trusted. They endured. They kept the faith, even if, as we heard, some were jeered, flogged, tortured, put in prison, sawn in two. Some had to wander the deserts and the mountains. They even hid in holes. But they remained faithful, even though they had not received what God had promised. Now, faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. And with this, the author of Hebrews turns to his congregation and reminds them, take heart, keep the faith. We're surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses. It doesn't get any better. Throw off everything that hinders so we can run this race. The metaphor then is an athletic contest. And like an Olympic event, the idea here is that in an ancient marathon, the runners would eventually end up in a stadium, and in celebration of just completing the race, let alone win it, the runners would run a victory lap, and all those gathered would cheer and clap. And the author of Hebrews imagines the same for the followers of Jesus. We are running a race laid out by the Lord himself, and the day will come when we finish this race and get to take a victory lap. And Moses, and Jephthah, and Rahab, they'll all be cheering. Now, that's a big vision. It's a tall order. That day's far off yet, we think. Oh, we're waiting for that day when we can run in the stadium. But I'll bet you anything that there are photo albums closer to home, closer to who we are on our daily basis. Every church, every family, every one of us has a photo album. And there are faces in that album who were there for us at just the right time. They modeled the faith. They nurtured us in the faith. And we know they're cheering us on. Can you see those faces in your photo album? They're there. To this day, I think back to a Sunday school teacher I had, Mr. Custer. I probably talked about him here before, and I will again. Mr. Custer was my Sunday school teacher for a number of years. He just seemed to be the one they always went to. He was always there. He was retired. He always just seemed to be at church. If you were at church, Mr. Custer was at church. Sunday school for him was a simple affair. He'd read Bible stories to the class, and then he would tell us why he loved that story or what he learned about God from that story. I just remember, for me, hearing Mr. Custer tell these stories, why it seemed as if they were real to him, as if he had been there and witnessed this. And he'd always read from a pocket Bible. He'd pull out of his back pocket, pocket Bible. And he said, this Bible is what got me through World War II. The Bible looked like it had gone through a war. It was tattered. Cover was faded. There's even a burn mark, one of the corners. But we didn't dare to ask about that. He would open that Bible and tell us the stories of the faithful. And he would say, like so many men and women whom God took care of in these pages, God took care of me in the war. And he knew whether he lived or died, he would say, that God would be there for him. Jesus would be right there by his side. You know, I'm now in my 50s, and Mr. Custer's Sunday school lessons have been adequate all these years. Who is in your photo album of faith? Who is it that has encouraged you, nurtured you, challenged you, walked alongside you, maybe even sat on the sidelines with you for a bit? Who is it who's kept you in the race? Who are the folks that have kept this church in the race now for decades? Can you see them? Do you see their photos? Some have passed on, but they're here as a great cloud of witness cheering us on in this sanctuary. They are cheering for us to keep the faith. In the name of the Father, the Son,